What is going on in Sudan? Last year I made a video in which I explained the causes of the civil war in Sudan. And given the fall of Bashir to the RSF and the imminent risk of mass atrocities and the collapse of humanitarian access, I am re-uploading that video again. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you watch it from beginning to end and understand the causes and the context of the gravest humanitarian crisis of our time. Thank you. Since Sudan gained independence in 1956, the country has been subjected to repeated military coups. In 1989, a man called Omar al-Bashir overthrew the government and commenced what would be a 30-year dictatorship. In 2003, in the west of Sudan, in a region called Darfur, a group of non-Arab rebels rose up against the government on grounds that for far too long, the non-Arab population had been discriminated against by the government. Omar al-Bashir responded to the rebellion not by relying upon the Sudanese army, the SAF, but by arming an Arab militia within Darfur that had historically been at odds with their non-Arab Muslim neighbours. This Arab militia was known as the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed, in addition to the SAF, committed what many refer to as the first genocide of the 21st century, in which 400,000 people were killed. Due to the atrocities that were committed in Darfur, the International Criminal Court indicted Omar al-Bashir on charges of war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity. But Omar al-Bashir had another concern: how to make his presidency coup-proof. As the Sudanese government has a history of being subjected to coup d'etats, Omar al-Bashir wanted to ensure that that wouldn't happen to him. And how did he do this? He turned towards the Janjaweed once more. In 2013, Omar al-Bashir rebranded the Janjaweed militia into the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. And in 2017, a law was passed that legitimised the RSF into Omar al-Bashir's independent security force, with the head of the RSF, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. The idea was that the RSF and the SAF would keep one another in check, deterring the other from carrying out a coup d'etat. In order to ensure the loyalty of the RSF, Omar al-Bashir basically gave Hemeti free rein over Sudan's gold mines. Hemeti had a huge chunk of Sudan's gold, and he would export 99% of it to the United Arab Emirates, who would refine it and sell it on the international market. This made Hemeti an incredibly wealthy and powerful man. Using his wealth that he generated in his trading of gold, Hemeti built an armed force of 100,000 troops and 10,000 armed vehicles, an armed force that could rival Sudan's army. Hemeti, with his astronomical wealth, had basically created an economic empire, a state within a state, and an armed forces outside the control of the regular army. But in September of 2018, mass protests erupted throughout Sudan in response to the government's cutting of wheat and fuel subsidies that tripled the price of food. The people had enough. They wanted Omar al-Bashir gone. Unsurprisingly, he wouldn't go. But the unrest would prove to be too much. And on the 11th of April 2019, the RSF and the SAF joined together to overthrow Omar al-Bashir and promised to hand over Sudan to a civilian-led government. On the 21st of August 2019, the Transitional Sovereignty Council was established, which was a council of both military and civilian representatives, with the Sudanese Army General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan its head, and Hemeti his deputy. An organisation known as the Forces for Freedom and Change, a body that represents the civilians of Sudan, elected Abdallah Hamdok to be its Prime Minister, and on the 5th of September 2019 he formed his cabinet. The plan of the Sovereignty Council was that for the first 21 months Sudan would be ruled by the military, followed by 18 months of civilian rule. A 39-month blueprint for Sudan to transition to democracy. However, problems soon arose. The civilian leaders wanted to restructure the military and review its business interests and bring them under civilian oversight. In addition, the civilian leadership wanted those complicit in the Darfur genocide 20 years prior, which included both Hemeti and al-Burhan, to be brought to court. The prospect of losing so much power and possibly facing jail time didn't suit either al-Burhan or Hemeti. And so on the 25th of October 2021 they staged another coup, arresting the Prime Minister and civilian leaders. Sudan was now led by two men, al-Burhan and Hemeti, and in December of 2022 the men signed a framework deal that would pave the way for democratic elections in 2023. However, a sticking point emerged between the RSF and the SAF. The sticking point was how would the RSF, Hemeti's own private army, be folded into the country's military, the SAF. Al-Burhan wanted the RSF to fold into the SAF in 2 years, but Hemeti said he needed 10 years. At this point, Hemeti is incredibly powerful. He has a state within a state and his own armed forces. Folding the RSF into the SAF would reduce his power drastically. This was unacceptable to Hemeti, and it became crystal clear that there was room for only one man in Sudan, al-Burhan or Hemeti. In early April of 2023, troops from both the RSF and the SAF lined the streets of Khartoum. On the 15th of April 2023, the city of Khartoum was rocked by a series of explosions. The RSF and the SAF accused one another of starting the conflict, a conflict that would descend into a bloody civil war that would tear Sudan apart. Over the last 16 months, Sudan has collapsed. The fighting that initially began in the city of Khartoum has left the city in ruins. The same fate has been shared in cities throughout Sudan. The infrastructure of Sudan is finished. The entire country has become a battleground between two men and their armies, both of whom have no concern for civilian life. The death toll is uncertain, but in the region of Darfur in West Sudan, the site of the genocide 20 years prior, history is repeating. In the city of El Janina, 10 to 15,000 non-Arabs from primarily the Masalit community have been killed by the RSF. The overall death toll has been subjected to various estimations, but some estimate it to be up to 150,000, as countless people are caught in the crossfires of the RSF and SAF. The death toll to one side, the humanitarian crisis is colossal. Prior to the start of the war on the 15th of April 2023, Sudan was already one of the poorest countries on earth, with 15.8 million people needing humanitarian aid. But since the war began on the 15th of April 2023, this number has risen to 25.8 million people, half the population of Sudan. Sudan is the largest displacement crisis on earth, with 11 million people displaced, 2 million of those having to cross the border into neighbouring countries. Sudan is the largest hunger crisis on earth. 25.6 million people, half the population of Sudan, are facing crisis levels of hunger. In North Darfur, famine has already been declared upon a population of 755,000 people, with other regions hurling towards a similar fate. As Sudan's hospitals are frequently targeted, only 30% of the country's healthcare system is functioning. Add to this an outbreak of cholera. Add to this an outbreak of malaria. Add to this an outbreak of dengue fever. Add to this an outbreak of measles. Then compound that with the constant fear of either you and your loved ones being caught up in the crossfires between the RSF and the SAF, or perhaps being subject to ethnic cleansing. Add to this the at times unbearable heat, and you have a scenario of hell. And as is sadly the case in war-torn environments, it is the women and children that are subject to the worst human rights violations. And Sudan is no different. Sudan is home to some of the most beautiful and illuminated people on earth, and their country is being torn apart amidst a power struggle between two men. The country is dying. And what's just as tragic is that the world has ignored it. Sudan is a classic example of how the power aspirations of the elite can savage the lives of millions. We all need to play our part in spreading awareness of what's going on in Sudan. We have to support those charities whose aid workers are risking their lives in this war-torn region. And most of all, we have to pray for Sudan. These people don't deserve what's happening to them, and they certainly don't deserve to be ignored like they have been. And I'll leave you all with this question. If the people of Sudan were non-Muslim, white, blonde, blue-eyed, do you think they would be ignored like they have been? What do you think?